And I hadn't really contemplated, so Enoch, to your point about really talking to someone else and avoiding the soundbite stuff, it didn't change my position, but I think I think about it differently, and I would talk about it differently because of that. How do you guys react to that?
Are you referring to, I mean, I know, are you referring to like maybe a woman being compelled to not be, that's what you're referring to, right? You didn't realize
and I can easily say, well, look, you got pregnant, right? All those things. And right. But at the end of the day, you're compelling someone to do something against their will. And that is not how God made us either.
Yeah. I think the point that you've raised here, Charles, is a crucial one. And that, again, we're all on both sides. People are getting in a bubble where it's all self-reinforcing. The only legitimate view, the only legitimate issues at stake are those that I and those I'm, affiliated with are defining. And the ability to at least hear people's concerns about coercion of women, right? Or people's concerns, for example, that the conservative Protestant Christian movement has not always been in the same place on this issue. Catholic Church has actually been pretty steady. In the beginning around Roe v. Wade, the response from the conservative Christian community was pretty ho-hum. And there were even resolutions supporting the availability of abortion under certain circumstances. So hearing each other out and recognizing there really are differing viewpoints about how the rights of mothers, the rights of women, and the rights of children should be worked together, again, in a very unique situation where the life literally of one depends upon the other, and the life of the other is drastically, sometimes mortally affected by the presence of the other. So I think we need to talk a lot more and be perhaps a bit more humble than people have been on either side.
So should we allow, quick answer, should we allow pro-life or pro-abortion to be a threshold issue that drives the rest of our voting, right?
I would say no, because I think the church only further digs itself into the box which it finds itself in now, which is it is thought to be largely concerned about, quote, pelvic sins and problems.
I hadn't heard that phrase before. Thank you. Enoch?
I guess I'd be very careful if someone were to say, what is the one litmus test for politics for a party? It is playing out. The classic conundrum of someone has, quote unquote, my position, but personally does not live in any way according to that position. The argument of the lesser evil, I think we've had a couple years to really consider. And I don't think it's ever that straightforward or simple. So I would, if someone was going to like be a theologian or a professor, I think there might be a few, because there's core doctrines and litmus tests. But I think regarding, say, abortion, I know someone could say, but it's about life. But actually, I think there's plenty of other laws that actually affect life, and pronounce suffering and poverty that people may not realize or may not connect those dots. So I probably would resist this being the one litmus test.
Well, let's shift gears and let's talk about the Search of Mar-A-Lago. I didn't think that was going to be a campaign issue, but it's turned into a campaign issue because it wasn't on our radar screen a month ago. And so we're recording this in early September, so events may continue to unfold between now and the election and when this is aired. But the Presidential Records Act passed during the Nixon administration vests ownership, or in the wake of the Nixon administration, passed ownership of presidential records to the National Archives. They legally own the documents, but it allows former presidents access to and, quote, to possess, unquote, records from their administration, and makes no restrictions related to security level of those documents. That said, The Justice Department and reporting asserts that the information in Mar-a-Lago, at least some of those documents, were not being disclosed to them in their conversations, were not being treated properly, and that led to the search and seizure of those records in a former president's home. And so let's start with our typical question. Are there any biblical principles at play here, or is this pure policy?
Well, I think there's, at least a principle of impartial application of the law, which the scriptures care a lot about. It says over and over again that the mark of a good leader is that they impartially apply the law to the rich and the poor, the connected and the unconnected, and so on. So there is a biblical principle. I think the problem, I think one of the problems is, and this is, we see this not just here but in other places. A law is written, and what possession means, what ownership means, what abuse means, is never really specified in, or rarely specified in, the legislation. We figure it out through the regulatory and then the judicial process when it gets challenged. So again, and I'm very loath to tread in areas where I have no expertise. I don't know how political versus legally and judicially appropriate the Whitewater investigation was, or the FBI investigation of Hillary 10 days before the election, or now the seizure of these documents at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, I've heard many different vantage points going back and forth, and I see some merit in them, but I think fundamentally the issue, the legal issues will get settled out over time. This isn't so much about the legal issues. It really is about where the country is around trust or distrust of past leadership, present leadership, where they're taking us, what they did, what role they're playing. And that's really what's at stake here. The legal issues over time will get sorted out, as they do. But there's a deep divide over where we are as a nation, and it's just getting played out in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, it seems like there's three groups. One group trusts Trump, doesn't trust the Justice Department, the FBI. Another group trusts the Justice Department and FBI and not Trump. And then there's those of us in the middle who I don't trust either one of them. Mm-hmm. And so, Enoch, which bucket are you in now? Oh, golly. So how do you see this issue?
I thought, what could I contribute to this? If Ray is like, I don't want to tread where I don't know, I'll just, well, here's an observation. No one at my church has asked me about this question.
Interesting.
No one in a lot of circles that I serve in and run in have honestly care about this. And that's interesting because this is an example of how the difference between someone that is passionate about politics in general and can see, honestly, the profound implications of this. Like, this is kind of precedent setting. Raiding the home of a president, like that's not a small thing historically or judicially.
Former president.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, former president. Thank you. Yeah. That is an important point. But yeah, former president. But that
very important. Yeah.
That being said, it always comes down to what's important to people. So we've talked a little bit about, in our episodes in the past, like, people concerned about, the Arab Spring, or people were concerned about democracy in Hong Kong, or people concerned about, racial justice here and other places. So, it's hard to be universally passionate about everything all the time. And so my first thought is, wow, as I was reading this, why don't I have any background knowledge on this except that it happened? And why am I getting that feeling, like you said, Charles, like, the Justice Department says this, the FBI says this. Why am I getting that feeling? Like, oh, is it that big a deal? And I think as I thought about this, if you are a strong supporter for Trump, this is probably not going to change anything. If you are, this is actually going to add fuel to the narrative of, there's a conspiracy. If you are a strong detractor of Trump, this will, again, probably not change anything. And I think maybe that's why my brain filters that. It's just now going to be, and I don't know if this is the correct term, politicized. Like, it's just going to be every side, everyone's going to fit into their narrative. So Yeah, that was my creative way to say I don't really know. I don't have a lot of thoughts on this, but I did read those
No,
articles you
hey.
sent me, Charles. I did read those articles you sent me, and I do think Ray is right. The impartial execution of justice and laws, but also and again, this is very probably naive and simplistic. I think as a leader, part of your calling is to be the servant leader example. And I think one of the articles you sent, I believe, was a Wall Street Journal op-ed, which said probably the FBI could have done other things to ensure the security of those documents, but also pointed out that Mr. Trump could have responded very differently in other ways. So I appreciate his nuance, but having read literally like just a paltry handful of articles, I just watch you two talk. That's all I'm gonna do.
Well,
Go ahead, Ray.
oh, I was just going to say, and I completely understand, Charles, why you're kind of in that third group that says, I don't trust either party here very much. Okay, and I can as somebody who has watched Donald Trump for 4 decades, don't trust him. And as somebody who has seen the Justice Department do everything from spy on civil rights leaders and a whole bunch of other things, I got my deep distrust there. I think what tips me over into the group that says, I trust the Justice Department a little bit more here, is not even so much the facts of this case, and it certainly isn't the arguments of those who have opposed Donald Trump. It's the people who Donald Trump appointed. It's the people who were gung-ho supporters in 2016, through much of the administration, who served in the administration. It's when I listen to William Barr, Mike Pence, Bill Stepien, BJ Pack in Georgia, Eric Hirschman. I can just go on and on. H.R. McMaster, John Kelly. You just go on and on with it. That's what gives me cause and makes me say, I don't know, Justice Department, I think you need to get in there, kind of figure out what's going on. So it's not the detractors that concern me. It's the former supporters who are sounding the alarm loudly, publicly, stridently in some cases. And I'm sort of saying to myself, I wonder if other supporters are going to catch up with them.
I think, when I think about this issue, and I've said I don't trust either. I think we've got caught the Justice Department willingly fooling themselves to find reasons to investigate other people, doctoring evidence. So I'm not trusting what they're saying. That's why we have trials. And so maybe this goes to trial, and that's where we actually determine the fact. But I don't trust Donald Trump because he says what he needs to say. But we're playing with fire, I think. Right? Because now, just like we impeach every president, and that's going to be now the standard thing, we're going to search every former president's home, and then we're going to search every Secretary of State's home, and it's this downward trajectory. And so I think that's one issue we need to be reasonable about. And there's an image to the world that gives, and it's provocative to people who are against the interests of this country. Then I think that's not to say it shouldn't be done, but it is to say, I have yet to see the Justice Department present something that says, oh my gosh, now I know why they needed to do that. They may still yet do that. Mm-hmm. But based on what we've seen so far, it seems that they could have gotten a court order to compel Trump to disclose more documents, or to protect them differently, or to inventory them different, or have somebody else. It just seems like there were other steps that could have been taken short of searching the home. There may not have been time for that, but they haven't actually shared reasons why that was the case. So I'm concerned about where we are on it. I think it has the power to really blow up.
Oh, which is why I think everybody's treading so differently, so gingerly here. I think this is why Merrick Garland agonized over this, because and many people are concerned not just about growing political discord, but they're even uttering the words civil war, right? The concerns are well placed. And I think in the early stages, we often don't see very clearly why certain things were done or the rightness or wrongness of them. We'll have to see over time. Again, I remember being around in Watergate and how difficult people felt, and how much they felt we were on the precipice then. Yeah. Not so much again in necessarily the Whitewater investigation or or in other cases, although, of course, the screaming about the politicization of it. And you're right. I mean, I think people are concerned about what's happening around the issues of impeachment. But I'm also not surprised, because I think the history of people is that we kind of fill up a measure of polarization and paralysis, and either we draw back, we get wise enough to understand this is taking us down a road that is a lose-lose, or we don't, in which case, as Mark Knowles so wonderfully said about the Civil War, that the theological debate about slavery was settled by Reverend Ulysses S. Grant. I hope it doesn't come to that. But you're right. We get to these places where the combination of difficult situations and the continuing polarization of the nation puts us at great risk and peril. I think we're at one of those moments.
What would you say to someone who would say, not to justify Donald Trump having these documents and not disclosing them, but to say it seems like we're setting up two systems of justice, because we didn't raid Hillary Clinton's house. We didn't raid Sandy Berger's house, and he was caught taking documents out of the National Archives. We didn't raid other people's houses, but we raided this house. And so it seems like it's political, and we're setting, and regardless of whether we should have searched those other ones, it seems like a pretty common set of facts, and we treated it differently. Are we
actually they're a pretty uncommon set of facts? I mean, I think in the sense that in one case the concern was very much about emails and servers, and my understanding is that there was an acquisition of a server, a private server, and so on. So the facts of the case, as best I remember and recall, and someone can certainly correct me on this, didn't justify looking for boxes of documents. The concern was around emails. I don't know the details as much in the context of Sandy Berger, and at least in what the Justice Department has said, they've issued to both the lawyers and former President Trump a number of pleas to return what were thought to be important documents and risky documents. And those went unaddressed and unanswered. So again, whether there were other things they could have or should have done, I don't consider myself competent to answer. As I say, and we'll know more. And we will definitely know more, either in trial or in an agreement that's kind of worked out. But I think the real issue underlying here is a deepening fear, frankly. This is just another platform on which we're playing out our political polarization and division.
How should we be concerned? So the White House has said they had no involvement in this decision at all. Let's take them at their word for that. Mm-hmm. Although if I were a partisan, I would add in, even though it helps them, let's take them at their word. They had no. Is that concerning? Because that concerns me, that an unelected, so less accountable official made the decision to search a former president's house, and the president, who the Justice Department works for, has no accountability for it. That seems to me like that's from a democratic process perspective, a problem. Am I thinking about it wrong, or would you guys agree?
Go ahead, Enoch.
Enoch was hoping you'd answer.
I mean, I'm happy. I'm happy to give my opinion, good or not. But I mean, I do think this again. It really gets down to whether you trust Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, or whomever, right?
You trust is at an all-time low in everything, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, so the deal is, on one level, we would applaud a non-political figure for being the one who makes this decision. We applaud Ruckelshaus resigning. We applaud, Elliot Richardson and other people taking a stand as a non-political. Well, I mean, they're somewhat a political appointee, but taking the stand in justice that the president is not above the law. So I think there are times when we say, thank God, more politically driven figures were not, and we want to know that they were not the drivers behind a legal / judicial decision. So on balance, for me, again, I don't know how true it is,
Yeah.
but if it's true, I'd feel better about that. I don't know whether that's plausible deniability or the truth. If it is the truth, I actually feel a little better about it.
I don't like it if they weren't involved, and I don't like it if they were involved. So I don't know what to do with it.
Well, this is leadership, right? No matter what you do, somebody's going to be unhappy with you, right?
Enoch, anything on that before we close out and move on?
I appreciate the exchange here and listening, and I honestly feel convicted. I probably should read more about this. It's the classic: if no one's asking me questions, I don't have to look it up as much. And we've already seen I've had to look up things that maybe other pastors don't ever have to bother. Like when someone's applying for a baptism membership, are they setting up for a political asylum from an East Asian country? Most of my white pastor friends never even thought about dealing with that. And so when it comes to this, I kind of go back to, I feel like I read this somewhere. I agree with Pastor Ray's sort of that kind of overview of history. I mean, I actually thought the election of Donald Trump was that. Like, as people polarize, it's like a game of chicken. Well, the Republicans wouldn't really vote for Trump, and then, well, okay, we'll call the bluff, and they did, and then, well, they wouldn't really storm or assault the Capitol. I'll try to use more neutral terms, but it goes. And so, and the classic political thing is, like, if you're going to raid a former president's home, Donald Trump is, if you're a detractor, an easy target to do that to. People would be willing to go to that level. But for the same reason, that would just simply galvanize his supporters. So I really think the solution, if one thinks that not just a particular individual like Donald Trump, but our country is a certain direction, it's just better to not give them attention. I mean, I remember that's basically going way back. So I'm just, no press is bad press on, I think, as certain politicians are concerned, and we're just giving a lot of press to someone, giving them a lot of coverage, and they're not spending money on their election campaign to get this press. So those are my thoughts. I would say that I don't know if we should be, well, I'll stop now. Not just
Okay.
for there.
Okay, so let's go on to inflation then. Inflation in January of 2021 was 1.4%. By December of last year, it was 7%. It was 8% in February. That's before Russia invaded Ukraine. And it just came out at 8.3% for, I think it was August. August or July is the most recent data available. And so when we think about inflation, same question. Are there biblical principles involved? How should we think about inflation from a biblical perspective and what it does? So when we think about inflation and the effects of inflation, how should we think about it from a biblical perspective?
Well, for me, as I say, with regard to any policy and with regard to candidates, I'm really trying to at least think about three things from, I hope, a biblical perspective, and with the complete understanding that someone else also thinks from that same biblical perspective might come to a different conclusion. But I do want to know that the policy and or the candidate has a track record, seems to be tending toward the issues of justice, fairness, equity. Because I think that's a biblical concern and mandate from Old to New Testament. One example, 2 Samuel 23, final words of David: the God of Israel has spoken, the rock of Israel has said to me, one who rules over people justly, ruling in the fear of God, is like the light of morning, like the sun rising on the cloudless morning. I also want to see that person shows and that policy shows a real concern for the least advantaged, not the most. And again, I think that's deeply biblical. Deuteronomy 10. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who is not partial, does not take bribes, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and who loves the strangers, providing them food and clothing. And he goes on to say, you shall also love the stranger because you were a stranger in Egypt.
Yeah.
And so a people who have a sense of God having lifted them out of a wretched condition should carry that same heart to a concern for others who are in wretched conditions. And then the last thing I would say is I'm looking for evidence of what I call appropriate humility. And I mean by that, the essence we've all heard, Proverbs 16, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. That's my experience in life, in the church, in politics.
Yeah.
Arrogance, the unteachableness and unwillingness to listen and hear, and especially listen to your opponents and respect your opponents, is a recipe for disaster.
Listen next week for responses from Pastor Enoch and Pastor Ray to that last question. Visit visionNewEngland.org for past episodes and resources, and click Donate to partner with us to accelerate evangelism. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Louise Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide. God bless you, and thanks for listening.